be sent out afterwards to all of our attendees and our partners, along with any resources or links as a follow-up. So you'll be able to have that access later on. This is part of our physically distant, socially involved series. We developed this series as a response to what was going on with COVID, really thinking about where can we look for inspiration, lessons, and opportunities during this time, specifically so that we can change what comes out of this space as what was given to us when we came into this space, and especially thinking about DEI and inclusivity around that, which is very applicable to our speaker and guest today. So our conversation today is with Chronically Capable founder and CEO Hannah Olson. Hannah Olson, pronouns she, her, hers, is a Lyme disease survivor with deep roots in the chronic illness community, serving as a global ambassador for Invisibility Youth Charity, a national Lyme ambassador, and a frequent panelist at diversity and inclusion conferences. The idea for her business, Chronically Capable, arose after she had to leave her dream job due to the aggressive treatment schedule for Lyme disease that required her to be on an IV for up to 6 hours a day. Although Anna's ambition and intellect were intact, the physical demands of a traditional workplace environment could not coexist with her life-saving treatment. In Washington, D.C., Hannah met an innovative tech team that was in the process of developing products that support remote organizations. And together they decided to found Chronically Capable to make sure no one ever has to decide between their health and work ambitions again. So thank you very much for joining us today, Hannah.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I wanted to start today's conversation. You have such an incredible story just based on your bio, and it links really closely to what you've developed Chronically Capable to be. Can you tell us a little bit more about the story behind that and the company and just how you came to be an advocate and a founder?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my bio said more about the story than I expected, but I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease while I was in college, and right after graduation got a PICC line in my arm, which for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's essentially a permanent IV that extends to above your heart. And so I was hooked up to IV medications for 6 to 8 hours a day. And I was very ambitious at the time, so I decided to jump right into the workforce, but quickly learned how hard it was kind of to manage working a full-time position and also managing the ins and outs of being new to the workforce, and not having the support of an HR department, or have bosses that actually understood or accepted, my needs. And so I reached this tipping point so early in my career of do I sacrifice my health or my career? And ultimately I decided, to take the path and protect my health because I was just so young that I really didn't want to have a lifetime of troubles. So I left this company and I met this young tech team in DC and joined their team. They were a startup building remote tools to support different organizations. And we were kind of having this point of pivoting as a business. And I said, well, hey, let's take my story as an example. I think that we have an actual opportunity to use what we're working on and apply it to a population that's super vulnerable. So in my case, from there, we put out a one-page website back in October of 2018. And it was basically like, hey, sign up and tell us if you're interested in this. We had no idea what we were doing back then. And in the first 24 hours we had over 1,000 people sign up, and we were just like, all right, this is something we really need to invest our time into. So I spent the next 6 or 7 months speaking with hundreds of people, with chronically ill people, with doctors, HR managers, government officials, and really tried to understand the real depth of the problem. And that's when, we came to a solution and launched our beta product in last May, and spent the next few months building out what you see today, which launched in February, right before all of this craziness, which I'm sure we'll get to a bit later. But it's been a wild ride, but a really rewarding experience, which again, I'm sure I'll get to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. One of the things that I was thinking about as we were prepping for the conversation was just how, in the past, a lot of companies have been really hesitant to have remote and flexible work policies. And obviously in this time, that's changed very rapidly. And so I was wondering how you've seen the impact of COVID changing access and inclusion for people with chronic illness in this time and moving forward.
Yeah. So, my job is to get businesses to to come on board and to start posting jobs with us. And so I have a pretty hard job prior to COVID, because I was trying so desperately to explain what flexible work looked like, and people had such blanket opinions of what that looked like. But during COVID, we've seen businesses across the globe really start to make accommodations for their employees, since all of these non-essential businesses have gone remote in such a short period of time. So what that's really doing is it's actually furthering our mission in many ways, because we're seeing how simple and how low cost it is to accommodate this virtual workforce. And I think it was something that we didn't intend or expect to happen, but in turn, it's been really beneficial for furthering the mission, because if we were able to make all of these accommodations for everyone in such a quick time frame, why can't we make simple accommodations for certain people here and there? So it really has shifted the way that our sales work. Has shifted business leaders' perspectives. I think it's going to really change how we get back to work, and if people are going to actually go back to traditional offices, I'm not sure. So yeah, I think in many ways, while it was a terrible time to launch a company, it was also a very cool time for the real mission behind what we're doing, and that flexible work is not that hard nor expensive. So it's been positive overall in terms of shifting that perspective.
Yeah, it's like putting the infrastructure in place before a little bit, like for people in the policies.
Right.
And in that way too, like what are some of the ongoing like accommodations that people need to do for within a business? Are there certain standards that all companies need to have? Is there a baseline?
In terms of like related to right now and working remotely?
Yeah, like working remotely or just even like moving forward.
Yeah. So one thing that's really helpful, she was on before, but had to leave for another call. My colleague Teresa, she created this wonderful guide, which helps, and it's for managing remote teams specifically during COVID, and it's focused on the chronically ill and disabled community. I'll make sure to share that in the chat. But one of the things she really talked about is like that one of the biggest factors of working remotely is just this superior support. It's more important. It's like caring beyond the team's work and productivity during this time, and actually caring about people. We have, technologies can actually really help to make employees feel connected and included. So using this time to have, virtual coffee chats and scheduled breaks and virtual happy hours, it can actually bring this kind of like this levity to the virtual workforce and increase our employee engagement and productivity. So I think that this is a time while we're out of the office, and many companies who aren't typically remote work companies, that there's a lot of things that they can learn during this time and bring it back to the workplace. So, learning these different policies that they should have in place, and coming up with, reasonable accommodations, and coming up with employee assistance programs. I think these are all things, it's kind of like this drafting period. So you can build that toolkit and then go back into the workforce. And so it's a really powerful time for employers to implement those. And I'll make sure to send the resource for that as well. But, in terms of ongoing accommodations, unfortunately, unlike a standard disability, there isn't this kind of standard accommodations list for the chronically ill community, because our needs fluctuate at any point in time. Back in the day, I had a PIC line, and now I don't. And so there's certain needs that could change on a day-to-day basis, on an hourly basis. So it's really hard to come up with this standardized accommodations, i.e., we need to put a ramp in the office, or we need to have an elevator. It looks much differently for people who are suffering from invisible illnesses. So I think that the most common like accommodation request that we see is this need for flexibility, which is why I've really shifted the way that we talk about chronically capable. And instead of using just the word remote work, I really try to use the word flexible work, because it doesn't mean that you need to work remotely 100% of the time, but it's just really important that employers are allowing their chronically ill employees to actually, have that flexibility to leave early for a doctor's appointment, or to be able to go into a room and, administer IV medications. These are simple things that don't cost the employer anything. But it's just kind of shifting that mentality, and that people are allowed to be a little bit flexible, and they're still going to get their work done. And also, they're just another big accommodation is speaking about transparency at work. And as we get employers and applicants signed on to Chronically Capable, we're going one step closer to being a more transparent company. But this needs to continue while employees are at the office, and managers should be open to their employees, stating, their needs and how those can change daily and even hourly.
Nice. Yeah, I was wondering about if there were solutions that didn't really require a large budget or, like kind of a, larger accommodation. Are there certain solutions that you've seen within companies or anything that were like a little bit more innovative or creative in that way? Like if you have a smaller budget, or like what's something that you've seen maybe be successful that was surprising or something?
Yeah, so something I had no idea even existed before all of this, because I came from this small, design agency with no HR department, was that in a lot of larger organizations, you'll see employee resource groups, which are obviously they're across all different types of communities, but these groups really can help employees to learn about their rights and build community with other chronically ill folks, and can kind of serve as this safe space. One thing I always felt in a traditional office was I felt really alone, and that I didn't have anyone to talk to about my illness with. So I think these employee resource groups are such low cost to the employer. It's simply, a matter of signing them up or starting them, having someone lead them, and cutting that time out in a day. So that's one thing. And then again, as I mentioned, just kind of having that communication of being able to be flexible in terms of just being able to leave for a doctor's appointment, and having that communication where you don't have to be chasing your employer down and reminding them every time. So there's often, there's a huge list of accommodations that are listed in the ADA, but they're often, and we hear, 9 times out of 10, it's just that feeling of being comfortable and being able to have a little bit of flexibility. It's not, I need this, this, and this. And then another really interesting accommodation that I learned about through all of this was fragrance-free workplaces. This is something incredibly low cost to the employer. It actually all stems upon the employees actually understanding their surrounding colleagues. But this is something that a lot of people with chronic illness struggle with. I personally do not, so I can't speak to it myself. But fragrance-free workplaces is a huge thing in the chronically ill community. So eliminating like candles and Febreze and things like that, and having people not wear their perfumes and stuff. And that's something that obviously doesn't cost anything to the employer, but can make a huge difference in someone's ability to perform.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely know that we're really big fans of ERGs in our work, and we try to leverage them as much as possible because they do really provide that voice and community that people are seeking. What are some of the concerns, I guess we were talking about that a little bit, but that you've heard from businesses and meeting these standards? Like, are people resistant or like fearful about hiring people, or like having those conversations in order to, what does Chronically Capable do to help address these needs? Or, do you hear those kinds of concerns from businesses or companies?
So I think, speaking with these employers on a pretty much daily basis, I've learned that there's kind of this general lack of understanding about what it means to be chronically ill. Because unless this employer actually knows someone with a chronic illness or they have one themselves, it's really hard to actually understand this population. And so the general feedback that I'm receiving is that it's kind of this fear that people need serious accommodations, that it's going to be costly to the employer, that these people are sick in a hospital bed. I've really heard it all. And I think that all stems to a real lack of understanding of what it means to be chronically ill. And I know we're probably going to get to this later, but just, one of the big things that we've worked on is that awareness piece, and really getting the word out about what it means to be chronically ill. I'm really working on, whether it's press or blog posts, community events, but just trying to get the word out about what chronic illness actually is. Which has many different definitions, but it does affect 157 million Americans. So it's affecting people all around you, and it's oftentimes something you can't see. But employers just, if you're not touched by it, you don't understand. So it's not often, in these conversations, it's not often like a no, like this is not something we would do. It's more like, I don't even actually know what it means to be chronically ill. And so what we've really done is work on making this 2-sided disclosure process with businesses. And what we're doing is businesses are stating the accommodations that they're actually able to offer, and applicants are also listing, the accommodations that they need. And then another thing that we're doing to help businesses is that we have an HR support team member who also wrote that resource, and she's on the team, and she's there to answer any HR related questions surrounding accommodations, anything in that space. And so since we're this small team, we're in very constant contact with these employers. I've personally spoken with all of them. So we're really there as their one-on-one guides through this. So any questions that they have, we're there to support them, and really trying as a team because we are a job posting board at its core. But that consulting piece is huge, of just giving them the support on a day-to-day basis of, hey, I have a question, like this person has asked me for this accommodation. How do I make that happen? And, or what's the proper thing to ask? And so really just like a human to human answer, I think it really helps. And especially, being that I'm chronically ill myself, I really understand that experience. So I think it's been helpful for me to communicate with these employers and be like, don't worry, just have a conversation, be open. And that's been a really helpful thing as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of makes me think a little bit too of just like in general, because you're saying that there isn't as much like information out there if you don't have that personal touch on things, or if you don't have that like one-to-one relationship. Like what are some of the myths and stigmas that people with chronic illness face in the workplace, like either in their day-to-day, or like are there microaggressions? Like what have you seen, and how can companies be more aware of that?
Yeah, I think, speaking from my personal experience, I think there was just a lot of fear and stigma when I was coming out of college and entering into the workforce. And I wasn't prepared really for that question on a job application that, it's like, do you have a disability? And I never considered myself to be someone with a disability because I hadn't worked a full-time job yet. And so I wasn't even aware of, the accommodations that I personally needed. Because in school it was so different. I was able to have an IEP or talk to my teachers, and then you enter the workforce, and now I'm like, I don't know what I actually need. So there's a lot of fear involved in that application process because I didn't want to be judged based on my illness. I had done so well in college, and I wanted to be, launched into this big career and really take it to the next level. And I didn't want to be judged based on my illness from my bosses or from my colleagues. So I think some of the myths and stigmas around that is more from their standpoint. And like having spoken with hundreds of people over the past year, I've learned that my story is not unique. And I actually probably venture to say that people struggling, they struggle with asking for that support up front. It's all probably mostly out of fear. And it's very hard to kind of dig up that courage and really share your story with a stranger, and better yet with a potential employer. So, what we're really working on is removing that fear and stigma from the hiring process, and kind of like slaying the elephant in the room in a way, because there's this two-sided understanding here. If employers on the site, they're signing up because they believe that chronically ill individuals are capable of being their future employees, and then applicants are signing up because they have an illness and want to work. We're not, we're kind of slaying that elephant in the room. You're both on the site for a reason. And it makes that fear and stigma piece go away, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, what about people too, or I'm thinking about like unique impacts that invisibility has on people in the workplace. I know that there's like plenty of stories of people that hide their experience, or as a queer person myself, it's like even like my identity in certain ways, if it's not that visible thing, like how does that impact people in their workplace? Like what are some of the things that you see in chronic illness, like when you don't see that initially from the workforce?
Yeah, so I think like when I'm speaking with employers, honestly, or with anyone really, I'm really trying to speak, and I try to do this in my day-to-day life, is speaking about the strength and resilience of the chronically ill community. Because when you're suffering from this like long-term illness, you're inevitably becoming your own doctor, your own nurse, and you have this incredible sense of self-awareness. And so it's really amazing to see kind of the resilience that our community embodies. And I think that's a really unique impact in the workforce entering, with change in the work, especially right now while things are changing so drastically. Having that ability to adapt and change based on your health condition, that translates really well into the workplace. And I think, when you're dealing with this constant fluctuation of emotions and symptoms and pain, like you're having to adapt to whatever your body is feeling that day. And so this kind of just, again, it translates to this great sense of flexibility and strength that I don't think I would have personally ever learned had I not been sick with Lyme. And so I think it makes you a much better worker. And I think that there's so many traits that I could speak to of the community, but I think the main two things are that the adaptability and the resilience, which I never knew were things that I had gained until I was a worker. And then I'm like, oh, wow, we're shifting business at this moment, and I'm able to just kind of switch gears. And that's because I've had to do that for the last, 6-7 years of my life. And so I think that it really translates to being a great worker overall.
That's awesome. Do you have any examples of situations where, I guess like if you're already in a workspace, or I know that a lot of people are also dealing with like layoffs, like new experiences entering into another workplace, where because it's not visible, like, and you may or may not want to disclose, like how do you talk with a manager? How do you talk with employees to, hedge that a little bit, or make sure that you're being accommodating for people if it's not something that's visible?
Yeah, I think so. So like I said, I think there's so much fear and stigma for the person who's chronically ill, especially when you have an invisible illness, because you can't just say, in my case right now, I don't have a PICC line in my arm. And that's a big thing that, you would never know that I'm still, exhausted so many times during the day, and I'm still experiencing symptoms. But when I had a PICC line, it was, in a way, it was like, hey, I have this token on my arm. I'm hooked up to an IV bag. You can see what's wrong with me. So it was a lot easier to communicate. So I think, and I might be straying from your question, so I apologize if I am, but I think in terms of communicating while you have an invisible illness, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do with Chronically Capable is, if you're on this site, you're in a way admitting that you have a chronic illness, or you might be a caretaker of someone with a chronic illness. So you're actually kind of slaying that elephant in the room and saying, just by applying through the site, that you're struggling with invisible illness. And I think another thing, it really falls on the hiring managers, as well as your day-to-day managers, to check in. This is something that I didn't realize the value of until I had someone that was checking in on me and saying, hey, how are you feeling today? Is the workload okay? Do you need any help? And having that also from employees as well. It's just so great to have friends in the workplace who might know what you're going through. But there is so much fear and stigma that's involved in saying that up front. So I think it's a lot of just like being able to communicate on both fronts, on the employer and the applicant, and kind of letting your guard down, which is something that I think is really hard for people, because no one wants to talk about being sick. It's not comfortable. It's not fun. And so I think it's just something that takes time and experience. And at 21, when I entered the workforce, I was a totally different person than I am now. So I think it's gotten a lot easier to have those conversations. But that is also because I'm in this work. And I think that that's impacted so much of how I work with others, and how I translate that to people I speak with, because I'm kind of launched in this work. But otherwise, you don't really, it's an awkward thing to talk about, and that's real.
Yeah, makes me think about too how, so when Involve started, it was as a result of Audelis. So Audelis is the executive search branch of the organization. And what was happening is that, diverse candidates were being placed into companies, but it became really clear that within, a certain amount of time, there was actually a high like drop off rate. And so Involve became part of the company because there was this need to actually change a lot of the culture within an organization. And so I'm curious, what types of culture changes need to happen to ensure that equity inclusion for people with chronic illness actually takes place? Like, what's that, if you can place people there with, the work that you're doing chronically capable, but then what are some of the, kind of other types of culture changes and education that you're talking about that needs to happen for people to feel that, true equity within a workforce?
Yeah, I think culture, it's one of those, one of those things. And we say on our website, actually, I'm going to reference it so I say it specifically, but one of the things we really talk about is Section 503, which actually requires employers to take affirmative action to recruit, hire, promote, and retain people with disabilities in the workforce. And that's a law in the United States. But one thing that law doesn't talk about is culture and embedding people into the culture. Retaining people and embedding them into the culture are two different things. And so I think one of the things that is really important for employers to understand is it's one thing to hire a bunch of people who might be, considered diverse or in whatever group. And I think this applies to any diversity group. But it's another thing to embed them in your culture. And so employee resource groups is one great thing, which we talked about before. Also education and awareness. So I think that it's important for employers who are actively investing in this space to keep their other employees updated and educated, whether that's lunch and learn sessions or bringing people like me or other advocates in the space in to talk about their experience, because it's, culture is about all of the people in the room. So if you place one person into that room and no one else is understanding, then no one's going to be able to, help that person or look out for that person. So I think it's really this education and awareness piece. And employers should be investing their time and money not only into hiring people, but into coming up with creative solutions to keep these people engaged and part of the community. So whether that be employee resource groups or, coming up with outings for those employee resource groups, but really working on embedding them into the actual culture and not making these people feel any different than the rest of their colleagues.
Yeah, no, I think that that's very important. And as you mentioned earlier too, that the ERGs are like very, very meaningful in creating that space and that, the safe space, I guess, within an organization, and also an advocacy space. So you can talk about these things with, a bit of a backbone too, that it's supported by the organization.
Yeah, and putting out, not only just having ERGs, but like putting out content and whether it's blogs and actively investing in researching and talking about the space and showing that you're actually a company that's committed to helping this community rather than just, signing a check and hiring people. It's about actually providing stuff that's relevant to them and important for them, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like getting the pulse on like what's happening and being authentic, right? A little bit. It's like, what does authenticity look like? So kind of switching gears just a little bit here. Definitely, your story has been really compelling. It's driven this business. It's also been like a voice. How do you feel that or like, why do you think that your story resonates so much with people? Because you are very active in community. And then how has that, being that visible, and also again like being that person willing to name the elephant or slay the elephant in the room and like begin that conversation, like how has that type of visibility changed your life or changed the conversation that you've seen as an advocate in the community?
It's a great question. And, before any of this, before Chronically Capable, before even that one-page website back in the day, I did not talk about being chronically ill. I was like the textbook invisible illness person. I graduated from school. I didn't want anyone to know I was sick while I was in school. I rushed my way through college, graduated a year early just because I wanted to get out of there. I didn't want anyone to know anything was wrong with me. I didn't go to, my mom was like, please go to support groups. Please do this. Please do that. Find a community here. And I was like, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. This is my struggle. This is what I'm fighting with for internally. And I think it's been incredibly empowering to share my story. It's at first I thought it was kind of cheesy because, I put this Facebook post and Instagram post like, hey, I'm trying to start a business. Surprise, I have Lyme disease. And everyone, it was just like this outpouring of support from people I hadn't heard from since I was a kid. And it was overwhelming at first because I'm like, I kept this hidden for the last 3 years, and now suddenly everyone knows and strangers know and the internet knows. And now it's, being picked up by Forbes and Fast Company and all of this. And it's not, it's not private anymore. So I kind of went through all of the stages of like, wow, this is scary, to wow, I actually have a chance to use my voice now to help others. And I think in many ways it's really helped me heal, because I had so much anger and resentment towards being sick. I'm like, why did a tick bite me? And why did this, derail my early career? But it's kind of been, the more that I work on Chronically Capable and the more I share my story, it feels like I'm fighting back against Lyme disease in a way, and kind of like regaining that life that I felt that I was kind of stripped from. So it's been to answer that in a nutshell, it's been a very overwhelming and very weird thing to just talk about your illness publicly. But I think it's also been really helpful for especially young girls around my age, or younger than me, who are, that's been, I think, the biggest community of people who have reached out of just like, this is so great. I'm about to graduate college. Like, I feel much more inspired to enter the workforce. And like, those are the messages that actually keep me going. Not from a narcissistic standpoint, from a like, hey, I really need to like keep fighting for these people who don't have a voice, who don't have a platform. I'm incredibly grateful for having a platform, and that like this actually got picked up, because if it weren't for people like me and Emily Levy, who's the founder of Mighty Well, and Ali Cashel from Suffering in Silence, all these amazing advocates, if it weren't for them, that we wouldn't be talking about chronic illness, because illness is something people don't talk about. So I think it's been a very powerful experience to be able to really like kick back at your disease. And it's also kind of fun to be like, I started this business because my ex-employer didn't let me have my IV at my desk. And now, like, look, I've started a business and I'm in Forbes right next to your name, and it's really fun without slashing the business. So it's kind of just been this like cathartic experience. And honestly, the more I like dive into this work, the more I've just honestly gotten healthier myself, because I've taken so much of my energy and put it into something good, that I'm focusing less on the things that are hurting. And I'm really starting to like, heal, help from a health standpoint, which kind of sounds crazy, but it's been a good few years.
That's
That was a long-winded response.
I
Sorry,
was
but
like, that
that's
was an
actually, I
amazing
love that
response.
question.
Yeah, no, it was like, that was a fabulous answer. And it also makes me think a lot about like, you must have seen maybe some like really amazing transformations or like exciting wins, like as an advocate, either, personal stories, like you said, like people reaching out and saying thank you, or also maybe on a bigger platform, like policy level or anything like that. Like since you've started Chronically Capable and begin these conversations, like what are some of the awesome wins that you've seen?
I think it's been just the greatest thing is when employers sign up, because it's like that's the bread and butter of the company. If there was, if employers weren't signing up, this wouldn't be working, and that's I think the most rewarding. It's I don't care about press or any of that. What I care is that employers are actually saying, hey, not only am I going to support this, I'm going to pay to hire people, and that's also been the most challenging thing to get happen. So I think it all comes down to like my sweat of like reaching out to people, doing sales, which I hate. And that's been, I think that the biggest wins. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Wikimedia signed up, which was amazing, because it's like I'd been reading Wikipedia articles since I was a kid, and now they're posting 25 jobs on the site. I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. But then I think, from a policy standpoint, I've worked with Joe Kennedy, and I'm hoping to continue that moving forward, from my home state of Massachusetts, and meeting with congressmen, and that was a really great experience. Just getting to talk to him, and getting to have a space to be able to say, this is what I'm building, and what do you think about this, and having him, stand behind what we're working on was really great, because it was someone, the Kennedy family is very much involved in the disability space through like the Special Olympics and Best Buddies, and a number of their family members have been disabled. So getting to speak with him was a really positive, kind of like personal win. I think my mom's a huge Kennedy fan. She like loved the selfie we got, and he tweeted about it, and it was so cool. So I think, and I'm hoping that my work with him will really start to kind of take it to the next level, and continue to go to a policy standpoint. He's running for senator right now, and I would love to have someone like that, whether it's him or someone else, really kind of like give that political stamp of approval, saying, the government does need to crack down on this. This shouldn't be an aspirational goal. This should be a mandate. And so I'm hoping that the more I continue to kind of sneak my way into the government space, the more we'll actually start to see some systemic change in the law here. Because right now we're working off this idea that it's an aspirational goal, but companies aren't getting, big fines or, sued if they don't hire people. So my goal, is really to make sure that happens.
And what have you, I know that you mentioned like Wikimedia, like, and in sales, like sometimes you have like multiple conversations with people. Sometimes it's, people just buy in right away. Like, have you seen, like, what are some of the conversations that have shifted the narrative, or that actually like inspire people to, sign up, or actually, commit to hiring people with chronic illness and making those accommodations?
I think it's been, sales has been the hardest thing I've ever done. because I'm not someone who's good at being pushy, and I'm not good at following up via email. So I think that's been like a personal, real struggle for me is doing sales. And I think finding the right person to talk to within an organization is way harder than I thought. But I think in terms of when I get the right person on the phone, that's been always a very positive experience. I don't think since I've really spoken with people, there's been that many times where someone's been like, no, this is a terrible idea. I think it's more been like getting in touch with the right people and, getting it to the right boss of that person has been probably the more challenging thing than sharing this, because I think in many ways I am our target customer, right? So, when I'm sending these decks out, it's like, I was that, or not our target customer, sorry. I am our audience in terms of the chronically ill people. So it's really cool for employers to hear me then saying, 2 years ago, I was sick in a hospital bed. Like I almost died, and now I'm doing this. And I think that that's been a really powerful thing for employers to actually see when we get, if we get on a Zoom call or something, and I'm showing them this deck of me with my arm up with a, PICC line in my arm, and then they're seeing me on the phone, and I think it's really great, and it kind of sells itself in that way. But I think another key thing is just saying, if you're not like you should be doing this, like you're late to the party. This is something employers have been doing, large companies have been doing for years. We look at like a Microsoft or Bank of America, like these companies have D&I departments. They have like disability wings within these D&I departments. Like you're late to the party. So I think that kind of adds a sense of urgency and really gets them on board. But, if anyone here knows employers, I think that that's my hardest, my biggest hurdle is finding the right people and really finding companies that just finding the person to talk to at a company, and being such a small team.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. So like with all that, like thinking forward, both for Chronically Capable and like the work that you're doing, but also as an advocate in the space, like what does success look like in the future? Like what is, an ideal world in that way for people with chronic illness in the workplace? Like what can be done both within individual companies and kind of in a larger scope?
I think like thinking from the top of the funnel down, like complete success, what that looks like to me is that we will have eliminated the unemployment gap between individuals with chronic illness and individuals who don't suffer from chronic illness. And not only that, but that we'll be providing stable opportunities for these individuals, because it's really expensive to be chronically ill. Medical bills are very high, and when you don't have a job, it's even harder. So I think like finding stable work opportunities for these people, that's success to me. And really actually starting to like make a real dent in that unemployment gap, will from a high level is like true success. But I think on, a smaller scale, it's that, I will have had in the next year, like working with these first 25 companies, that they will have actually hired people, that they have actually retained them, that they've actually embedded them into their culture. Like at the end of the day, we built this platform because I was that person, and I experienced that pain point. So I really want to find these 15,000 people jobs. And that's why I'm, pulling these late nights and early mornings, because like at the end of the day, I just want to get these people hired and finding jobs that really work for them. So to me, that's the ultimate success is really getting these people back into a job that they find fits their needs and accommodations. And I obviously like, I hope to see buy-in from larger companies. It's kind of the chicken and egg situation. You need one big company to say, hey, I'm posting jobs for a lot of the little ones to flock. And so I'm obviously hoping for some buy-in from larger companies in the next few months. And then, on a personal level, I just hope to keep being able to do this. It's been really fun and really, I've met some amazing people. So I just want to keep fighting the good fight.
Awesome. And then to close us out a little bit, one of the things I was curious about is, that chronic illness does touch pretty much all communities. And I was wondering how how can companies kind of include intersectional needs within their solutions? Like how, and have you seen, alliances form within advocacy spaces? Like, are there those conversations about intersectional identity or needs? And, like, how does that manifest where companies can say like, hey, I'm also an advocate for this. And so this is related to that. And so, how have you seen those things come together?
Yeah, I think, we're not reinventing the wheel here in terms of what we've built. So there's a lot of companies doing very similar things as we are, specifically just in the diversity space, for women and for people of color. And so, there's other companies doing this in different niche audiences. So I think rather than looking at these people as competitors, I always think of them as allies, because we're fighting for the same thing, just for different populations. So I think in terms of like crossover, there's totally crossover. Like, I'm looking at those companies' websites and saying, like, no, who are the employers that are paying for this site, because they should also be paying for ours. And I think in terms of advocacy, there's so many great organizations that bring these young people with, voices in this space together. One that I've been really fortunate to be a part of is the Summit community, which is an entrepreneurship community. But they have a fellowship program for 81 advocates and entrepreneurs from around the world. And through that, we're all in from different sectors, not like different age ranges from like 16 to 40, all from around the world. But we're all fighting for totally different things, but that all kind of overlap. So I think, working to like collaborate with other people who are fighting for, diversity and inclusion in general, it's really great to be a part of those communities and then start to kind of collaborate together. I never say no to being a part of events like this, but more so even in my community, any type of chronic illness organization, any type of, women in tech, anything like this. I think there's so much crossover, and that we should all be supporting one another. And that's the only way that change is going to actually happen, because it takes a lot of voices, not just one. So I think just making sure to always be supporting those other people, sending them congrats when they do great things, and continuing to try to collaborate in as many ways as you can. Because, if Google's going to hire a bunch of people through one company, that they should also be hiring chronically ill people. Like, come on, wake up. So if we can help one another, then that's the ideal scenario.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. It's very inspiring in a way too, to think that, people are uplifting each other, and that there are communities working together, and that there is like a movement taking place even amongst this time that's, challenging, and that, people who are most affected are also like building those bridges, which I think is really exciting. So unless you have anything you wanted to add as like a final sentence or statement, I was going to open it up to questions from the group if anybody has anything. So if you want, you can raise your hand, and I can unmute you. You can ask a live question, or if you have a question you want to add to the chat box, we can see it and answer it from there. But oh, awesome. So it's the resource that you had. Oh. I'll unmute Felicity. You've got the
Hi
stage.
there, how you doing? Hannah, that was so awesome. Thank you so much. That was extremely valuable. I was frantically taking notes in the background in order to make sure that I was able to ask the questions that I want. The first one is your geographical reach. Which businesses do you serve across the country, or which states do you serve across the country?
Yeah, so when we put this out there, I was personally based in Washington, D.C. I actually relocated during all of this insanity to Austin, Texas. But because we started out originally with a remote work focus, we decided to kind of just open it up. So right now there's positions pretty much across the United States. I would say that they're most commonly in larger, metropolitan cities where there's a lot more tech, and those are oftentimes the companies that are more interested in this, especially in places where there's nonprofits and tech. So a lot of jobs like San Francisco, New York, Boston, Austin, Washington, D.C., but there are so many remote positions on there, and some of them are global remote positions. This is something we've kind of had a fine line between, because, we're fighting for based on laws that are strictly focused on the United States. but I don't see a limit to this because there's so many people that reach out to us. We actually get a huge outreach from external places outside of the United States. That's one of our biggest, outpouring of support in terms of applicants. So I don't see a problem with it. It's more just like finding the connections. We're such a small team that doing sales is so hard in the first place. So, starting to reach out outside of the US is more just like finding the time to do so. But I don't really see that borders affect it because this is something, chronic illness is everywhere. So, ideally, I'd love to have positions all across the globe.
And you also mentioned we touched on the pandemic, and obviously this being a dreadful time to launch a business during a pandemic and all of that kind of good stuff. But obviously the flip side of that, not to ever look at the positives of global pandemic, but the flip side being that now there's a whole bunch of senior executives who were not bought into flexibility, who didn't see it working, who pushed back very aggressively towards it, and now are kind of eating humble pie a little bit and saying like, hey, it turns out actually everyone can work flexibly and remotely, and that is successful. How does that now impact you, and how is your organization going to kind of like jump onto that and endeavor to kind of maintain that cadence of remote working for the candidates that are coming through Chronically Capable?
That's a great question. And yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And so what we decided to do, which was a very hard decision to make, is that when we launched this in February, our intentions were to take this very slow and to slowly bring on employers to make sure, we're helping them find these people and just not overdoing ourselves. But then this happened and we decided to make a very big shift in our business model. And we actually made the platform completely free to employers through as long as things are happening and as long as things are still shut down. So right now that has very much so impacted our ability to sign on employers because there's no barrier to entry there. If you're not even paying, it's like, okay, why not try this out? And, our goal is to really engage these employers during this time and provide them that superior support, really start to help them work on stuff when they get back to work in a traditional setting if they are an in-person company, so that they will stay on and translate to paying customers. But I decided, and we decided as a team that while it sucks because we're not, bringing in revenue right now, it's something that, the more opportunities we can get on there and the more we can learn from our employers right now and really start to see, how does making sure everything works and that we're best supporting them, then we can start to translate them into paying customers. So in short, I think it's actually been helpful because it's free. So employers are just like, sure, why not? And then, I've just been really working on the customer service aspect of keeping them up, sending them resources. We put out that resource that I put in the chat, just giving them as much support as they can in order to bring things to the next level.
Just one more question, really quick. Parker's like, get off the line. One more thing is, how can we help you? How can we get this message out? Obviously, we run a search function. You mentioned, your lack of familiarity or lack of comfort with sales. That's what we do. So how do we get this message out? How do we pitch you to the employers that we work with?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First off, that's a really nice question. It's more just like getting the name in front of people's eyes so that they know what we're doing. I'm happy to send you a brief kind of short deck about who we are, but as much as we can get people, to see and to learn about who we are, I think that's the more that this is going to, right now, as I said, since employers don't actually have to pay, there's no barrier to entry. So it's a really great time to just be sharing this and getting the word out. We're actually going to hopefully, we have an awesome pro bono press team that just joined on us and has volunteered their time for the next 3 months. And they're hopefully going to do a big push because, right now it's such an important time to be talking about this. I think it's actually more timely than ever. So just getting that awareness out, I'm happy to send you any more information about it. Our website, I sent you guys the website. Getting the word out, I think is what would be best. If you guys have clients you're working with, hey, these people are helping helping people with chronic illnesses, like it's free. So
Yeah.
check it out. If they find value in it, then great. And if not, we'll hope to try to make them find value.
We'll provide feedback. Yes. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Felicity. Yeah, so maybe if anybody has any last questions, otherwise we'll kind of wrap up for the day. If you want, there's a raise hand function on the bottom, or you can enter any chat into the side. Cool. Well, I just, again, really want to thank you, Hannah, so much for your time and all of your inspiring words. It was really, really nice to actually get a better sense for what's going on in the industry in general and what Chronically Capable is up to in your journey and getting there. We will be sending out, so I know you mentioned like a bunch of awesome resources, and like you put the link to the deck on the chat box. We can send that out. So this is all being recorded. We'll send that recording out along with resources, links, any additional stuff that came up in the process of the conversation out next week to everybody. We will be sending out also a follow-up survey. So we had a little bit of a networking session in the beginning. This is a series for us that we're launching. So if you liked the content, if you found it kind of in the middle, or, you know, however it was, we'd love to hear back from you about things you'd like to hear about in the future, any ways we can support. And upcoming next, we have on May 20th, there will be our remote 5 generations, 1 remote workplace. And so that is a conversation about just what does it look like to have these intergenerational conversations? What does a workplace look like that has all these different stakeholders in the room remotely? So that will be coming up on May 20th. We would love to see you there. And then I just wanted to check in with you. I mean, you've given us the website and everything, but is there any additional places to find Chronically Capable, or anything that you're up to next if people want to connect with you, or anything, Hannah, that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I'll put our like social links in the chat. We actually just started this past week. I realized that, you know, it's important to get these job postings out everywhere. So I started trying to post those on Instagram and stuff as well. But the main page of the website I'll put in as well. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think I was tagged in those posts that were announcing this, so feel free to connect with me, and I'm happy to chat with anyone. And again, thank you all for coming and listening to me blab for an hour. I appreciate it.
Super helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.